Okay, I think we'll get started. Kwekwe, bonjour, hello everyone. I want to start with a land acknowledgement, and this is a land acknowledgement provided by the 2025 National Conference on Ending Homelessness, which is taking place on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Teotihuacan, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples from coast to coast to coast. And I want to add, I'm not one for written land acknowledgements. I usually prefer to give my own, so I'm just going to follow up with a bit of acknowledgement that I feel really humble to be here in this territory, and I hope that I myself as moderator for this session and all of us can engage with this content in this session today that's respectful of the traditional peoples of this territory and all of the Indigenous peoples who have called this territory home. So my name's Rebecca Schiff. I'm moderator for the session today. Originally, we had two presentations that were scheduled for our session. I'm not sure where our second presenter is. Perhaps they'll show up and have gotten lost in all the excitement post that fantastic keynote we just had, and lunchtime and busy lines for washrooms and all that sort of thing. But failing that, we do have an excellent presentation ahead of us now. And I'm not going to take too much of your time other than to let you know that we will keep questions until the end of the session. So please keep that in mind. And then I'm not sure if our room is equipped with simultaneous interpretation, but in case it is, or if you're not aware for other sessions that you might engage with, there are simultaneous interpretation headsets that are available in level 2 or level 5 foyer if you'd like to take advantage of that. Okay, so I'd like to continue now into our presentation. So I'd like to introduce Jessica Cleric, who is the Executive Director of the Homelessness Society of the Bow Valley. And Jessica will be speaking with us today about her presentation, Beyond the Mountains, Addressing Homelessness in One of Canada's Top Tourism Destinations. So help me welcome Jessica to the stage.
Wonderful. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of the Homelessness Society of the Bow Valley. We often go by our acronym HSBV. So throughout the presentation, I'll be referring to our organization as HSBV. HSBV is a small local charity based in Canmore, Alberta, and I'm really happy to be here today and share this space with you to share a little bit more about the important work that we're doing across the Bow Valley to support community members who are experiencing housing insecurity or who are unhoused. So the key topics and objections for my presentation today. First and foremost, talking a little bit more about identifying housing insecurity in rural and remote communities. I'll be sharing a little bit more about HSBV and the work that we do, as well as the importance of low barrier services. I'll also share a little bit more about the creative ways that HSBV has continued to support unhoused populations, even in the face of funding or capacity limitations. And then also speaking about the critical role of collaboration and community in making a greater impact in the work that we do. First and foremost, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement for where I call home. So I myself am from settler descent, and I really recognize the importance of not only appreciating the beautiful land that I call home, but also honoring the history of the Indigenous peoples that have long stewarded the land that I call home. So with that, HSBV operates within the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. In the spirit of reconciliation, respect, and truth, we honor that the Canmore area, known as the Chewap-Chipchian Cootee B, and the traditional Treaty 7 region is within the traditional territories of the Ira Nakota, comprised of the Bearspaw First Nations, Chiniki First Nation, and Goodstoney First Nation. as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nations and the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is comprised of Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai peoples. The HSBV team acknowledges that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. And we acknowledge the long-lasting and harmful impacts of colonization. We honor and we celebrate the territory that we call home, and we're dedicated to reconciliation. Okay, so before we dive in, I just have a couple of questions for the audience. So by a show of hands, I'm curious, who here is representing or coming from a rural, remote, or Indigenous community? Great. And by a show of hands, who here has been to Banff or Canmore in Alberta? Okay, quite a few. So if you have been to the Bow Valley region, you will recognize that it's a very beautiful location, very high tourism, one of the highest tourism hotspots in Canada. But if you aren't familiar with the Bow Valley, so we're located about an hour west of Calgary, which is the closest major urban center. We call the Bow Valley region, the Bow Valley region is comprised of a few smaller communities within and at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. So we have Banff, Canmore, Minithne, Lake Louise, Exshaw, and Kananaskis. And as I said, if you've been to the Bow Valley, I'm sure you can appreciate it's a very beautiful place, jaw-dropping scenery, world-class skiing and hiking. But living in the Bow Valley comes with its own set of unique challenges. In fact, according to the Alberta Living Wage Network report in 2023, the Bow Valley had the highest cost of living across the province of Alberta at an estimated $38.80 per hour. In comparison, Calgary in the 2023 Living Wage Report was reported as having $23.70 per hour living wage, and Edmonton was $22.25. So, in addition to this extremely high cost of living within the Bow Valley, we also are in the face of a housing crisis. So we have an extremely limited inventory of affordable housing units, which is impacting a growing number of folks within the community. And this is supported by a housing and service needs estimation project that the Bow Valley community has conducted for 3 years in a row. So the first study was done in 2020. Another show of hands, who's familiar with the housing and service needs estimation surveys? Okay, so just for a little bit of context, these are optional voluntary surveys that we give out to the community to gather their input on the housing, shelter, and services within the community, but to also gather a sense of whether folks are housing insecure and maybe aren't even realizing that they are. And so in 2020, we conducted this survey with support from the Rural Development Network. And what we learned was that 56% of survey respondents had unstable housing and were at risk of homelessness. And 61% of those respondents were actively employed at the time of filling out the survey. Now, this survey was then followed up in 2023, and what we found was that 57 respondents reported being emergency sheltered, 23 respondents reported being unsheltered, and 1,123 respondents reported being at risk of homelessness. So, with many of us here being from rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, you may, like us, hear often, I didn't even realize there was homelessness in this community. So we're often hearing from the community that they don't realize that there is homelessness within the Bow Valley. And the reality is the Bow Valley community is experiencing what is known as hidden homelessness. So many who are unhoused or housing insecure may not realize that they're housing insecure or be in a precarious situation. So this could look like couch surfing, having their housing tied to their employment through staff accommodation, living in their vehicles, or camping or sleeping rough in the forest. Many of these situations are temporary, unstable, and they do often go unseen. And so that's where the Homelessness Society of the Bow Valley comes in. So our mission is to foster a Bow Valley community where everyone has access to safe, warm shelter and programs that support their needs. And our vision as an organization is that everyone in the Bow Valley has a safe place to sleep. Now, for a little bit of history about the organization, so we started as a pilot program, which was known as the REST pilot program. This was kickstarted following that 2020 Housing and Service Needs Estimation project, where we learned that housing insecurity was a pressing issue in the Bow Valley, and there were an increasing number of folks needing shelter support. And so this REST emergency MAP program was piloted by the town of Canmore and supported by a local coalition known as the Homeless to Housing Coalition, or H2HC. And it was launched by really dedicated and committed community members. It was located at a local church known as St. Michael's Anglican Church for the first 2 years. So in those 2 years, we ran an emergency MAT program for just under 2 months. It was clear from running this program that there was a need for shelter in the community. And so in March 2022, HSBV officially formed and took over this pilot program to build capacity and extend the support. So since that time, we have moved the shelter to a municipally owned building called Scout Hall in Canmore. And each year we find ourselves in a position of growing in capacity and funding through hiring amazing staff, having an awesome board of directors, and really generous and dedicated funders, and donors, and community partners. Awesome. So our mission, as mentioned, is to foster a Bow Valley community where everyone has access to safe, warm shelter and programs that support their needs. And we work towards this mission through 2 core programs. So we run a year-round outreach program, which supports with system navigation and local referrals. And then we also run a low-barrier emergency winter shelter. And these programs really aim to meet the immediate community needs while also building long-term resilience in the community. So HSBV runs the only low barrier shelter in the Bow Valley. To us, low barrier is defined as having the minimum requirements necessary to access the program. So removing obstacles so that folks in need can access the program with minimal barriers. So for example, we don't require ID. We also don't have sobriety requirements. And this has been really crucial for folks to be able to access the support that they need. Our goal ultimately, or our approach, is meeting folks where they're at. So we really work to be client-centered and people-focused. So at this time, and really based on our current funding, we do operate the emergency winter shelter seasonally. So it is prioritized to operate over the winter months when temperatures can be well below freezing, there can be life-threatening weather conditions. And ultimately, that again comes from having limited funding to be able to run year round. So as mentioned, the shelter does operate out of a municipal building called Scout Hall in Canmore. And we operate on a first come, first served basis with a maximum capacity of 9 beds. So the Scout Hall space, as mentioned, municipally owned, this has actually been provided to us in kind between the hours of 10 p.m. and 9 a.m., which has really enhanced our capacity to run longer shelter seasons and make the most of the funding we have available. So you'll see the photo here on the right is the building where the shelter operates. So what's it actually like to use the shelter? So within the shelter space, folks can check in between 9:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. They're welcomed by 2 staff, and our staff really make an effort to get to know folks in a judgment-free, welcoming space with the hope of offering more referrals, recommendations to folks based on their needs. We also offer folks a hot meal through our Hot Meals program. We provide basic essentials like donated clothing, hygiene kits, and shower passes. And then in the morning at 9 a.m., folks check out from the shelter. They have a breakfast beforehand, and then they check out for the day. Our staff cleans up, and we get ready to gear up again for the next night's operations. So in terms of impact of the shelter program, so we've now run the shelter for 5 consecutive winter seasons. This coming winter season will be our 6th season. And each year, year over year, we're seeing quite a dramatic increase in the number of folks using the program. So this past winter season, 68% of our operating nights met or exceeded our nightly capacity. We also saw a 70% increase in the nightly average use of the shelter program in comparison to the previous shelter season. And we also had a 1,420% increase in the number of nights where our capacity was exceeded when comparing to the previous winter season. So we really are seeing a dramatic increase in the number of folks using the shelter program, and we anticipate that this next winter season will have similar findings. Now, as a low barrier shelter, we don't require that folks share demographic information with us. However, we do have an optional demographic survey that we encourage folks to fill in. Last winter season, we had 26 surveys complete. I will note there is possibility of duplication if someone unintentionally completed a survey more than once. But what we did find from these surveys is that 15 respondents had lived in the Bow Valley for 5+ years. So these are long-term Bow Valley residents who are accessing the shelter program. We also noted that 6 respondents were actively employed while using the shelter program, either on a part-time, full-time, or seasonal basis. And 7 respondents last had secure housing within the last year to 2 years. So their need for shelter was fairly new. Now, although the shelter is low barrier, we do assign unique identifiers to folks accessing the program based on the information that they do give. So we do ask for first, last name, and their birthday. So for example, if we had a guest named Harry Potter, who was born on September 1st, 1978, their unique identifier would be HAPO and then their birthday. And what this does is it allows us to track the number of unique individuals accessing the program, but to also track trends in terms of how many nights is a unique individual staying within the shelter space. So this was the approach that we used last shelter season. And from this approach, we determined that 33 out of the 58 unique individuals that used the shelter only stayed at the shelter for 1 to 5 nights. So it was a very temporary emergency solution for folks who needed somewhere warm and safe to go for a night or two. And a small portion of the folks using the service, 3 unique individuals, accessed the shelter between 101 and 151 nights. So for 101 to basically the full shelter season. One thing I will say, being a small rural shelter provider, there can be capacity limitations around data collection, but I will emphasize that it has been incredibly helpful for us to collect this data for our communications with the community, with our funders, with our partners, but also for us to be able to understand what is the need within the community. So that's the improved data collection has been pretty helpful for us. One of the things that we also do, we do host guest feedback sessions every month. So what this entails is inviting folks to stay back in the morning, have a warm breakfast, and get their feedback on the program. What's working, what's not working, and what can we do to improve? A lot of the feedback that we gather, we bring to our funders, we bring to our conversations with community with the hopes of integrating those recommendations within the shelter program. For example, last year we heard that the shelter mats that we had were not the most accessible, and so we were able to find additional funding to purchase cots that allows that is lifted from the ground to enhance accessibility within the space. We also heard that opening November 1st was critical. That was the earliest we'd ever opened the shelter, and it was super critical for folks. If you're familiar with the Bow Valley, we can get winter conditions starting in early October. So the earlier we can open, the better. It is ultimately dependent on our funding. But we have heard that there is a consistent need for year-round shelter, as well as enhanced client case management. So this is something that we're actively working towards. Now, as we build capacity with that long-term vision of operating a year-round shelter program, we do run our outreach program. This is mostly an opportunity to connect with clients and share referrals, help them navigate the system, and provide emergency supports like transportation or accommodation based on our budget and availability. Folks typically connect with the outreach program via phone or email. However, as is the case with many, rural communities, the capacity to operate that year-round shelter is limited by our funding, but we have tried to find creative ways to stay engaged and make sure that we're able to continue supporting folks facing housing insecurity. And so how we've done this year, we've launched a community food cupboard program in collaboration with the Bow Valley Food Bank, the Bow Valley Food Alliance, and the Town of Canmore's FCSS team. So what this looks like is we have dehydrated, shelf-stable goods in this community cupboard available to anyone facing food insecurity within the Bow Valley. We know that housing insecurity and food insecurity are deeply linked, and so oftentimes we are seeing folks within accessing the cupboard who can also benefit from accessing our outreach program. And so at the same time we run the cupboard, we also are running in-person outreach support. So we run the cupboard 3 days per week. There's no cost to the food. It's all either donated by the Bow Valley Food Bank or we've run community food drives to support. And the intention of this community food cupboard is to be complementary to the existing food programs that are already in the Bow Valley. So it's not meant to be a full solution to food insecurity, but part of the puzzle. Just to kind of give a little bit of a snapshot, so the Community Food Cupboard is a pilot initiative, and it was funded by 2 grants. One came from a local foundation known as the Banff Canmore Foundation, and another from the Town of Canmore. So we ran this pilot for 5 months, and over that 5-month period, we saw 348 visits at the cupboard. We saw an average of 7.1 cupboard visitors per day, and we provided 3,545 items to community members facing food insecurity. While the community cupboard was operational, we had our in-person outreach services running as well. And through the in-person services, we connected with 62 clients. We saw an average of 3.8 outreach clients per day, and we were able to connect those clients with different supports within the community, including shower pass tickets, bus tickets, but also just an opportunity to connect and build relationship with our team, which has been really critical within our community. So another creative way that we've made sure that we stay connected within the community and are trying to meet the diverse needs of unhoused and housing insecure folks is collaborating with the Canmore Public Library to run a clothing and gear swap. So these clothing and gear swap events happen monthly. What this event is, they run over Friday nights and Saturday mornings, providing the community with an opportunity to donate their gently used or new clothing and gear and come in and pick out new clothing and gear to them. So it's completely free. Donations are not required, but this has been a really great way for us to stay connected to the community, raise awareness about HSBV, but also foster a sense of belonging and a circular economy within the Bow Valley. Something that's been really great through the clothing and gear swaps as well is our ability to pull certain items like jackets and boots and socks to keep at the emergency winter shelter when we're operational. So it serves as sort of a dual purpose where we're able to actually gather items that are highly needed when the shelter is running. Just for a little bit of an idea about the impact of initiatives like this, we had 4,355 swap visitors between January to September 2025. We were also able to collect $969 in cash donations to HSBV. So, if you're not a charitable organization, these sort of initiatives don't require charitable tax receipts. And so it's a great way to kind of be in the community and raise funds, even if that's not necessarily the primary objective. We were also able to divert hundreds of bags from landfills of, clothing and gear. And as mentioned, really able to foster that local economy and sense of belonging among all community members, regardless of their socioeconomic status. So another way that we have tried to be creative and use our capacity to the best of our ability while still making an impact is co-chairing the local homeless to housing coalition. So what this coalition is, it's an advisory committee that brings together agencies from across the Bow Valley to have a shared approach to supporting unhoused and housing insecure community members. So the vision of the group is that all Bow Valley residents have access to safe, affordable, and suitable housing and support. And the mission of the group is to lead a collaborative community response on understanding and addressing homelessness in the Bow Valley. So we have a wide range of members that join these H2HC meetings. We have local emergency services like hospitals, fire response, bylaw, RCMP, Alberta Health Services, municipalities, housing providers, food focus groups, and recreation and leisure groups. So we meet quarterly, and this is a really great way for us to stay connected and start to brainstorm collaborative projects for greater impact. So one of the projects, for instance, that we're currently working on is a coordinated access referral system. So this is kind of in the very early stages, but it's a really great way to bring together diverse voices across the Bow Valley to talk about shared projects and shared capacity. Another really great way that we have built capacity as an organization is fostering stronger relationships with other shelter providers, especially well-established and well-established organizations. So one really great example is our collaborations with the Calgary Drop-In Center. So with the Calgary Drop-In Center, we've been able to foster great relationships. We've been able to establish peer mentorship. So an opportunity for our staff to gain training and knowledge from experts in the field. We've also been able to do a shelter tour and have been able to access different resources like policies and different templates that can be adapted to the realities of the Bow Valley and the capacity of the organization. Really, this helps us learn best practices, but also build capacity without having to reinvent the wheel. So strongly recommend wherever possible trying to foster these relationships. At the end of the day, we have a shared goal of trying to make sure that folks have access to warm, safe shelter. So collaborating together always leads to greater results. Yeah, so at HSBV, our vision remains simple, clear, but it is vital that everyone in the Bow Valley has a safe place to sleep. And while our emergency winter shelter does fill a critical gap during the coldest months of the year, it's not a full solution. Homelessness doesn't just go away because summer rolls around and the temperatures are warmer. In fact, the summer can bring other unique challenges, especially in the Bow Valley, with higher tourism and increased risk of human to wildlife encounters. And so our goal remains to work towards building capacity to operate a year-round emergency shelter. Before I get into my thank you. In summary, I really just wanted to leave you with a few kind of key ideas and key reflections. So first, homelessness and housing insecurity are often hidden realities, especially in those rural high tourism regions. Low barrier support makes a huge difference. Removing those barriers to access has been super critical, as we've heard from those using the shelter program, and make sure that every interaction we have is about meeting folks where they're at, providing dignity, respect, and human connection. Third, there's always opportunities to find ways to continue making impact, even in the face of funding or capacity limitations. So being creative to find ways outside of shelter programming to meet the needs of unhoused and housing insecure community members. Whether it was through our outreach program, the community food cupboard, clothing swaps, or other initiatives, trying to find ways to stay connected and make an impact. And fourth, partnerships and collaborations can really amplify your impact. So trying to collaborate both locally and also looking outside of kind of your local sphere to see if there's ways that you can collaborate, share capacity, and learn from other groups. With that, I will wrap up my presentation. Thank you all so much for your time and for listening. I'm happy to answer questions now. Yeah, great, if there are any. Yeah.
I just want to first off start off by commending you and commending your community. So we live in a very rural community, 5,000 is our population, and we in March started up a safe warm space. So, but due to limited funding, we can only operate Thursday to Monday, 8 to 8. But we're getting a lot of pushback from the community and zero support from the town. So if there's any suggestions on how you make connections, like we're getting, well, I've gotten texts from the mayor, you know, like, hey, there's a piece of garbage on the ground outside your space. You know, they're not even referring it to as what it is. It's not a shelter, because we knew if we went to try and put in a shelter, they wouldn't allow us to put a shelter. So there's no beds in our space. It's just, there's TVs, couches, chairs, you know, that kind of stuff. But how did you, or was there ever that kind of block, you know, with the town and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say in the context of for HSBV, we've had support from the municipality. I think a large part of where this support comes from is recognizing the reality of the circumstances, so that, you know, there is a housing crisis, that there is an affordability issue within the Bow Valley. But one of the ways that I think the housing and service needs estimation project that I had mentioned was a really great way for us to have the data to support the need. My suggestion is trying to collect data, as difficult as it may be with limited capacity, but trying to collect data in a way that's still trauma-informed and can make the data anonymous. So if you're having conversations with folks, trying to kind of gather those stories of what led to the position, respecting their you know, protecting their privacy and confidentiality, of course. But I find that those stories and the data really talks and identifies or helps legitimize the need within the community. I wish I had more to offer you, but since I haven't had that specific challenge, it's a little difficult to give you concrete suggestions. But there are, you know, groups in the room, and I know, you know, we have some funders who have experience working with small rural communities that have similar challenges. I would suggest chatting with them. I hope you don't mind, Sydney. I'm just going to call Sydney out. So Sydney, right there. Sydney works with reaching with the Rural Development Network, and there's a lot of experience, to my understanding, of similar challenges. So they may have some good insight. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, excuse me, for your shelter, if you have ran into issues, and how do you handle them in terms of policy or procedure, or just the situation itself, if you've had people who were actively using on site, and what your policy procedure is for that, how did you handle it, what are the steps that you take, and if it's repeated, then what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So within the shelter space, we do not permit substance use. Folks can present at the shelter under the influence and be welcomed within the space, but we don't allow for substance use on site. We do have policies and procedures around how to handle those pieces. Something that's been really helpful that we've developed is actually a flow chart for service restrictions to kind of help ensure that all of our team are on the same page about how many warnings, how to kind of handle those conversations. Something that's really critical is training for staff so that they're comfortable handling challenging conversations and kind of explaining why those rules are in place. I would say I pointed to kind of collaborating with larger urban centers to learn about their policies and procedures. I would strongly recommend trying to look around at the shelter programs that already exist and seeing if they have policies and templates that they may be open to sharing with you, and then of course adjusting to make sense for your community or your organization, rather than trying to kind of reinvent the wheel. I'm happy to share any templates that we have. Yeah.
If I can add as well, I don't know if this is on. I think the RDN is a great resource for sharing some of their knowledge, and particularly around supporting data collection. But another group that's existed for quite a while as well was the National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness, which some of you may be familiar with, or now it's known as the Rural Alliance to End Homelessness. And they have facilitated a community of practice for many years as a space for service providers in rural communities to be able to share resources and ideas around these types of issues, and particularly, coming with the understanding of what it's like to work in a rural environment that someplace in a big city like Calgary or Toronto or name your big urban center doesn't necessarily understand your context. So I think that's fallen a little bit by the wayside, but clearly something that might be a useful resource for folks to be able to share knowledge and information about things that are working or challenges that they're having in their communities.
Yeah, I think that's really great to add. And I did just want to clarify that we always try to meet folks where they're at. So we want to work with folks to make sure that they can access the space, stay within the space, and have warm, safe shelter. So a lot of the times, just having conversations and explaining the rules and why they're in place, I found has been really helpful and impactful. Hopefully that was helpful.
Well, I'm looking for specific, everything that you said, I agree with. I've looked into other shelters and I'm looking for specifically how you handle within your shelter. If, you have those conversations with the shelter guests, you go through the intake, explaining the procedures and the policies and the rules and all that, but then they'll still use on the property. Then you give them warning, you do whatever your policy is, and then it happens again.
Yeah, so we have kind of a certain number of warnings that we would give, and then if the rule continues to be unfortunately not followed, then we may have to have a conversation about a service restriction for a set amount of time. If there was an instance of rule breaking and it's kind of really late in the night, it may be the next morning that we have the conversation about why the service restriction needs to be implemented, and kind of when the shelter guest returns following the service restriction, we always have a conversation afterwards to kind of go over sort of what happened, why the rule was in place, why the service restriction was in place, and also get their feedback about, was there something we could have done better to explain the rules or to kind of support you in that moment to make sure that you could have stayed within the shelter space. So trying to make it collaborative so that the client, the shelter guest feels that we want them to be able to access the space, but we have certain rules that have to be upheld. So trying to get their feedback and incorporate the recommendations wherever possible, if there was a way that we could have communicated better or yeah. Yeah, it can be challenging conversations to have. Yeah. 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 That's the approach that we would take. I'd be curious if there were other approaches and would love to learn more. But thank you so much for that question. That was really great. Thank you.
At the back here, there's a question. Yep.
Thank you. I just wondered if you had any pressing safety concerns, because I kind of echo, we did have a shelter at one point, and it's no longer. And one of the hugest things, we had it as low barriers possible also, but the safety concern always came up. And I know staff training and was great, and we had a great group of staff at the time. So retention wasn't totally a problem, but I could see it becoming one if we ever did get to that step again. And then how do you negate the safety concern that is such an easy excuse not to even entertain the idea in a small community?
Yeah, so I think great question. We are fairly new, so we're constantly learning and evolving as well. I would say within the space, and I'm not sure, maybe this is a common experience, it is at least in our community, that the shelter becomes a place that's founded on mutual respect. And so folks, we always, come into the shelter setting with the best expectations of everyone accessing the program, but also with the expectation that we are together creating a comfortable, welcoming, safe environment for all of us. So a few things that we also have implemented aside from, as you've mentioned, training, policies, procedures, we do have self-checks upon check-in. We do require that baggage is, stored downstairs separately. Folks keep only, a notebook, phone, that kind of thing on their person. Doing the self-checks, and then we do have cameras that do record the space, and we always have staff on site at all times. We also do wellness checks throughout the night to make sure that they're that everyone is well. I would say from our experience, the space has been mutually cared for and respected by those. And I think a lot of that comes from the approach that our staff take to connecting with shelter guests and the atmosphere of shared, welcoming, safe space. I hope that that's helpful. Yeah.
Hi. I'm from Yellowknife, and similar to Bow Valley, highly transient population, highly transient workforce. So I don't know, do you see any effects of that kind of very mobile workforce flowing through? I know you have a lot of workforce housing in Bow Valley. We have none. So just maybe speaking to if you see that kind of transientness of the workforce kind of reflected in your shelter.
Yeah, I would say we do see folks come into the shelter or need the shelter program because they've recently lost their job, and so they've recently lost their staff accommodation. That's actually a very common experience within the Bow Valley. We, as kind of mentioned, being low barrier, we don't require that folks share their demographic details if they're working, those sorts of things. But we did learn that 6 folks who filled in the survey were working at the time of using the shelter. With the main reason of needing the shelter program being there was not a suitable inventory of affordable housing opportunities despite being in the workforce, and B, that the hotels and the hostels within the Bow Valley are have a very high rate. And so being able to afford a multi-night stay at a hotel or hostel is often beyond the means of many folks within the valley. So we do see the need for folks who are within the Bow Valley workforce, lost their staff accommodation, or simply can't find affordable or suitable housing.
So I'd just like to pop in on this one as well, and just so everyone is aware why I'm popping in with some comments here. I'm a university researcher, and I've been doing research on rural and remote homelessness for about 15 years now, part of which includes I co-lead a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project on homelessness in northern Canada. And on the question of transient populations, that's something that comes up a lot, and our project is called At Home in the North. It comes up a lot in the folks that we've been working with and doing research with on northern housing and homelessness. So certainly if you're interested in talking about that more, or feel free to come up to me or look us up at Home in the North. Actually, our website is down currently, so don't look us up right now. But feel free to get in touch with me because it's a big theme, and certainly northern homelessness that we've seen.
Hi, you said you have 9 beds, and you said in some of the data that there was a lot of turnaways because what is the actual homeless count? Are you saying, did you do a count? Like, are you providing beds for 9 and there's 20 on the street, or like what is the count? Because we have a 25-bed shelter in a small community, and there's probably at least that again on the streets that can't access it or don't have a beds or that option. So how many are you looking at in the community?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So last shelter season, we supported 58 unique individuals in the shelter at different times. We don't have a specific sort of count or a point in time count around housing unhoused community members. We are doing the Housing and Service Needs Estimation Project for the third time this year. So hoping that that will give us better data around the number of folks who are unhoused in the community. In terms of last year, our capacity last year was actually 8 beds. So we did increase it this year based on the need. But last year, we had to turn away on 2 occasions. Every other occasion when we exceeded capacity, we were either referring to our partner in Banff, YWCA Banff, or we were referring to a commercial accommodation where we have a partnership in place and we have a discounted rate at that hotel. So if they have availability, we're able to send a client to the hotel to access a safe night there with costs being incurred by the organization.
Hi, thanks. I'm just curious if there's been any progress or headway or where you're at with like the longer term solution in the town, and like if the town has bought in, and if you have any like.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So we have right now our board of directors released a 3-year strategic plan. One of the key goals being working towards developing a longer term solution for the shelter program. And so we're exploring a couple of different models. The space that we're currently in is town owned. So we would look to continue using the space until we can implement this longer term solution. So a couple of the ways that we're doing that, we have a working group with our board of directors who are looking at shelter solutions. We've explored or are exploring concepts like the shelter pod model, but we're also looking at potential partnerships with other housing and shelter providers within sort of the space of the Bow Valley to partner with their developments that they're currently projecting in the next 5 to 10 years. So we don't have a concrete 100% plan, but we are working quite diligently to build that plan. Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, we have one here.
Oh, sorry. Oh, right, yeah.
Hey, so you mentioned it briefly, and someone asked a question along these lines as well, but in the presentation you mentioned that it was like 75-ish% are short stay guests at the shelter. Where do these individuals typically go after the shelter stay? Are they finding permanent market housing? Are they transient and just on their way to another community, or how do you support folks in finding that housing?
Yeah, so a good majority of those folks had lost their staff accommodation and then are actively looking for new employment tied with staff accommodation. So many folks end up moving on to staff accommodation, to new jobs with staff accommodation. But we've also helped refer folks outside of the Bow Valley into Calgary if their needs exceed what the Bow Valley has to offer. We don't have, the most extensive network of support. So last year we made 2 referrals to Calgary and helped transport clients there through a bus. Some folks do end up moving into a more secure housing situation with friends. Some folks may have only needed to access the shelter for a few nights and end up going back to their home, to their original home. So it really does depend. We kind of see a wide range of stories coming through the shelter doors. Yeah. Any other questions?
Another one up here.
It's just an idea right out of when you were having your clothing swap. Because I was just wondering if you wanted the cash donations, sorry.
Just an idea popped in terms of your clothing swap, that if you wanted, that maybe cash donations, that if those who weren't in need would maybe do like a pay what you can, or a bag of clothing, like even if they're donating like maybe $5 for a bag, because I just thought that it might be a bit low in comparison to who, and knowing that the Bow Valley has a very large range of income, and there are lots of people who can donate. So just thought that
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really great recommendation. Thank you. I'll definitely bring that forward. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Question?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
It's a lively session. It's fantastic.
So I'm from Fort McMurray, Alberta, so very up north. And what happens, just to touch on her before, about what happens to people after they stay in shelters, where we are, we have something called a MAP program through the Salvation Army. And so people are allowed to use that as long as they can. And then if they want housing, they would contact my coworker. She is centralized intake. So then they get put on a by name list. And then they will get a housing first case manager. So then that's how they move through the system. So that's how it works in our small community. I know a lot of other communities are a lot smaller and they don't have centralized intake or even housing first coordinators. So that's really hard, but there is hope. And in our community, that's how it works for us. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I should mention that with our outreach program, we do make referrals to other programs or supports within the Bow Valley to help folks navigate the system and find the different housing options that there are. Unfortunately, within the Bow Valley, the inventory of affordable housing opportunities is significantly limited, but we do make those referrals and support. However, as you've pointed to, ideally, in the long term, we would love to establish a case management system or approach. And with support from the Calgary Drop-In Center, we have developed or we've replicated their database to help us with our case management. So this shelter season onward, we're kind of hoping to really advance that part of the organization to better support folks in navigating the system.
If I can jump in there quickly as well, I think for really small communities, and we heard from someone I think whose community was only 5,000 people, and there are a lot of really small communities struggling around, resources and supports to address homelessness and support folks experiencing homelessness in their communities. And this is where we really need a lot of good thinking and support from funders and policymakers and others to start and I think there are a lot of ideas about solutions and networked approaches to providing those types of supports, but we need a lot more there, which I'm going to say something more about when we wrap up. But are there more questions?
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jess. It was a really great presentation and great discussion. Thanks for everyone for being here today. I have to say it's really encouraging in a way to see a room so full of people who are working on trying to end rural and remote homelessness. I know going back even a few years, we might get a handful of people in a room for a session like this. So, so thanks to all of you for all the work you're doing on this issue. The other thing that I want to say as well, just to kind of wrap things up, because there's so many important issues and unanswered questions and resources and supports that folks are looking for right now to try and help their communities, is that, as you may be aware, Reaching Home comes to an end in 2028, in March 2028. And while it seems like a long way off, I can guarantee you that the federal government and our policymakers are thinking right now about what the next version of Canada's National Homelessness Strategy will look like. And I encourage all of you to do whatever you can to reach out to your local MP, to reach out if you know folks in Reaching Home, and encourage them to put more dedicated funding, stable funding, resources and supports for rural and remote homelessness. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for being here today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.